Sky Pilot. The lyrics are from The Animals. He blesses the boys as they stand in line. The smell of gun grease and the bayonets they shine. He's there to help them all he can, to make them feel wanted. He's a good, holy man. Sky Pilot, how high can you fly? You'll never, never, never reach the sky. He smiles at the young soldiers, tells them it's all right. He knows of their fear in the forthcoming fight. Soon there'll be blood and many will die. Mothers and fathers back home, they will cry. As the young men move out into the battle zone, he feels good. With God, you're never alone. He feels tired and he lays on his bed. Hopes the men will find courage in the words that he said. Greetings this morning, this observance of Veterans Day in 2024. Thank you for being here. Peace be with us. Thank you. You know, typically there are municipal ceremonies and parades, even church services to observe Veterans Day, especially in towns with large military presence, down in maybe San Antonio or San Diego, a lot of towns down south, Washington, D.C., Honolulu, Hawaii even. But there are still places where veterans are in the shadows and little understood. So today I would like to cover who a veteran is, how I became a veteran, and what it means to me. At this point, though, I'd like to ask veterans, if there are, I know there are some veterans in the audience, if you would stand, please. Okay. I want to say thank you for protecting our rights. Thank you for protecting our rights and our hides. So what is the meaning of Veterans Day? It originated with the idea of Armistice Day, which commemorated the end of World War I on November 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour. And that's when hostilities ceased and effectively ended that war. In today's world, it is an occasion that can easily be taken for granted. It could be just a day when it's a day off from work, or people can pursue personal interests. But fortunately, there are those who are not veterans who do appreciate the meaning of Veterans Day and reflect upon the sacrifices made for them. Others may have a passing curiosity about what it takes to be a veteran. Of course, veterans and their families may see the day in their own way. So why is Veterans Day given any importance at all? Is it really such a big deal? Is it just an interruption to business as usual? Who cares about Veterans Day? Well, think of Gold Star mothers, Gold Star fathers, spouses, and families who painfully live with the loss of a fallen service member. Their loss and pain is a lifetime burden. Then there are others with a sincere appreciation too. They are thoughtful citizens who perhaps could not serve, or who know someone who has served, or who simply realize that someone has to serve in order to secure the freedoms we enjoy. They recognize that unless someone stands up and signs up, then no one will stand in the way of aggression, destruction, assault, violations of human rights, and the destruction of the privileges of society. Importantly, not the least of those absorbed with the meaning of Veterans Day are actual veterans, whether they be on active duty or veterans of bygone conflicts, some with memories of past fears, horrors, or difficult circumstances, or others with lost limbs or ailments suffered from service. may be still suffering from the pain of loss, terror, or moral injury. On Veterans Day, veterans may feel with certainty that for those who fought, freedom has a flavor the protected will never know. So who is a veteran, and what does service mean? In the U.S., the term veteran means a person who served in the active military, naval, or air service, or who was discharged or released therefrom under conditions other than dishonorable. A veteran is someone who swore an oath to a cause greater than themselves. What is that oath? Well, it says, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed. This is very similar to the oath given by our founding fathers, who risked everything in making the Declaration of Independence. They swore, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, to borrow a few words from President Lincoln, a veteran is someone who has pledged to this country that they will be dedicated to the great task of this nation, that government of the people, by the people, shall not perish from this earth. Lincoln spelled it out. A veteran is someone who pledges to our cause that they will give the last full measure of devotion. Put simply, we wouldn't have our nation today if veterans hadn't stood up, stood fast, and sacrificed to serve beyond their own self-interest for liberty and freedom from tyranny, oppression, aggression, and justice for all people. Now, importantly, others stand up too. Peace protesters, rights activists, conscientious objectors, those who exercise their First Amendment rights to present another point of view. They're all valuable to sustain our way of life. They too should be recognized, and many of them, like veterans, will give all to protect our freedoms. In a practical sense, in the U.S., a veteran is someone, usually a male, but increasingly a female, 17 to 35 years old, who volunteers or was conscripted through friendly persuasion or compelled to join to avoid worse circumstances, such as community opprobrium or the need to get out of town fast. They may have easy duty in a support role, or they may face the dangers of combat. But what the individual service member does is not the only service required. Think of the families of veterans, mothers and wives, husbands and children, fathers who had their lives irrevocably altered by sending a loved one to duty in the Mideast, Vietnam, Korea, World War I, World War II, and on. They worried. They struggled to get by. Many put their lives on hold. Some were struck with grief and sorrow at the loss of their service member. Some faced the flag-draped coffin, the military ceremony, and the sorrow of living on without their loved one, even with the appreciation of a grateful nation. If we look at the extreme of service, what harm can come to a veteran? The fact is, 30% of veterans have a service-connected disability. Oh, sure, the VA helps as much as they can, but they need more help. And there are millions of them. Thoughts of disabled veterans go way back for me. Oddly, it's not in the numerous medevacs that I was involved in from field operations. Those were expected. These thoughts go back to the peace side, the going home side of my experience in Vietnam. when I was getting ready to get on a Freedom Bird and return to the USA, get back to the world. I was up at Tonsanute Air Base, out processing. Like in the military, of course, you have to in-process and out-process everywhere you go. So I was out processing and very happily doing so. I had stayed overnight in the military barracks there at Tonsanute Air Base, getting ready and thinking good thoughts about going home to the world. But because it was a headquarters, there was a lot of generals and brass around there. But because it was a headquarters in a logistical wonder war, there was a swimming pool. Now this was, of course, primarily for the brass, but nonetheless, in the middle of this Tonsanute compound, there was a swimming pool. I didn't have time to go to the pool, but I did walk by, and I saw a few guys swimming. The waters looked inviting in the heat and stink of Vietnam, so I looked more closely. There was this guy there hanging on the edge, and he said, "Hi." And I said, "Hey, how you doing?" Now he swished his arm through the water, and he replied, "The water's great." And I said, "Yeah, it looks good." As I walked slowly past, he started to swim away. It was then I realized he had no legs. 2 stumps above the knees, both of them. He must have stepped on a booby trap, a mine, a toe popper, maybe even punji sticks. Anyway, I thought he has to face life now without legs. What kind of life will he have? How did I make it through instead of him? Lucky, really lucky. Ever since then, I have sent a donation to the Disabled American Veterans for guys who got messed up like that and worse. So combat injuries include everything from 2nd and 3rd degree burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds, brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, nerve damage, paralysis, loss of sight and hearing, post-traumatic disorder, stress disorder, and loss of limb. The nature of what has changed from the days of Waterloo and Gettysburg is, the nature of war has changed from those days. Back then, soldiers lined up in ranks and they fired muskets at each other. Nowadays, it's different. There are booby traps, IEDs, and also medical help was very poor back in the days of Gettysburg. Many died from their wounds or from infections and disease. More recently, explosives have taken a greater number of lives. In Vietnam, 17% of wounds were from booby traps, including punji sticks. In the Mideast, 42% were injured by IEDs. Combat medicine has improved to the point that many wounded are evacuated and survive, at least to an extent. In addition to the veterans with loss of limbs or hearing or eyesight, there are millions of veterans who are suffering from traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, loss of cognitive ability, and depression. Not to mention moral injustice, being forced to do things that are abhorrent. Over 20 veterans a day take their own lives. These veterans feel the sacrifice every day. If we look at the overall picture today, there are more than 18 million living veterans in the United States, 6% of the population. Women make up a growing share of veterans. Today, about 9% of veterans, 1.7 million, are women. By 2040, the number is expected to increase to 17%. Of the veterans, 78% served in wartime. And according to the 2020 census, the share of U.S. population with military experience has declined. In 1980, about 18% of U.S. adults were veterans, but that share fell to 6% in 2022. So recently, 18% of the House of Representatives and 17% of senators were veterans. That's down drastically from a few decades ago when 81% of senators, there were 81% in 75 and about 75% of representative around that time. Now, why is that significant? Well, I know the history is mixed on this, but generally I think that most veterans want peace. They know what it's like not to have peace. They know what the consequences are. They know what the suffering is. They want peace, and I hope that veterans in our Congress will remind people of that before they make votes for war. Of course, in the Vietnam War, there was a higher number of representatives and senators in Congress, and we still went to war. On the other hand, there was a great deal of mendacity perpetrated by the administration during the Vietnam War, and they actually lied to Congress. So if there had been truth, maybe the story would have been different. So what does it matter if there are fewer veterans, fewer representatives, and so on? We might say that is the way it should be. There should be no war. People should learn to live peacefully. Or maybe our government should not engage in so many military ventures. Personally, I would like to see more diplomacy, more positive international relations, less conflict, less death and destruction, like Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, Lebanon, etc., not to mention numerous past conflicts. And that they go back to the dawn of human history, turn, turn, turn. Yes, I would like that, and it might be so if aggressive behavior, fear, hate, and greed were not so prevalent. Our inward response to conflict is fight or flight, not balance and flow and mindfulness. Right now, it looks like the history of war will keep repeating itself. But don't despair. One strong safeguard is deterrence, being strong. And another one is the truth. The truth being transparent and known by all. So for a nation, that means seeking the truth, insisting upon the truth, and also being strong economically and militarily. At least maybe we can deter those people who are aggressive. So while we might rely on some old veterans to save us, the reality is we must look to our youngest citizens to rise to the task. They have to be willing enough, smart enough, and strong enough to do that. But right now we have a bit of a problem. Across the country, recruiters are struggling to find soldiers in a shrinking pool of qualified young people. Only about 23% of all Americans between the ages of 17 and 24 meet the Army's standards, physical, moral, and educational standards. 70% of youth are not qualified to serve. That is a shocking statistic. The reasons are overweight, drugs and alcohol, medical and mental health issues, and it's something we have to be aware of. So what's the answer? Well, as a society, we need to get healthier. We need to get smarter. It is more than just exercise and nutrition, though. It's dealing with fundamental issues like child hunger, lack of health care, malicious advertising, social disruption, and many other related issues that weaken our society. It bothers me, but there's still an element of comfort. So far, there have been enough brave, selfless, capable people who serve us and protect our nation. So what does being a veteran mean to me on a personal level? Well, I signed up for ROTC in 1965, not knowing what the future would hold, and that 4 years hence I would be facing the prospect of going into actual combat. I was imbued with the ideals of our country. My belief then and now is that every citizen has an obligation to do something for their community and country, and thus earn the privileges of society. No doubt I was propelled into the military with the example of World War II veterans, and especially my father, who served in the Navy during that war as a special weapons officer in the Pacific. But it's hard to be a virtual war baby back in 1947 and escape the shadow of war and the inevitable need for preparedness. So I went to Vietnam. It was the war that was supposed to be over only a few short months after the Marines landed in Da Nang in March 1965. That war persisted well after our national leaders insisted that the end was in sight in 1967. And also that war persisted until the bright shining lie was turned upside down with the shock of the Tet Offensive in 1968. Anyway, I came home after doing my duty, and I'm glad I had served and survived the service. Coming home is another story, and it wasn't easy, but I am encouraged that people can now see the service of a veteran as different from the way politicians conduct a war. Veterans get stuck in bad situations while they are trying to do honorable things. No matter what, vets are the few who stand up to protect the many. They and their families bear the pain and sacrifice of war. Sometimes they suffer the opinions of their countrymen and women. Most of all, they try to stand up for what is right, even when that is not clear. Without the sacrifices of those who ever served, we would be in peril. That's something to think about on Veterans Day. Thank you. And now we have a few minutes for some talk back, if you want, if you wish.